Welcome back. Dr. Chadwick here, part of Your Nutrition Physicians. And for today we're talking about healing yeast infections naturally. Both men and women get yeast infections. But before I talk about yeast infections, I want to talk to you about something very important also. And that's the fact of what the true causes of all diseases are. There's really only two main causes of all diseases that we know, except for things like genetic imbalances, which is only about 1 or 2% of the populations have genetic problems. Things like sickle cell anemia or Tay-Sachs disease, these are genetic problems that affect very little amounts of the population. But most all other chronic or acute problems come from deficiencies in your body, nutrient deficiencies, and toxins in your body. And I want to do me a little favor here. I want you to type in the comment box below there if you can challenge me on that. Tell me what other diseases that you know of that are not caused by nutrient deficiencies or toxins in your body. Okay, so let's get back to today's topic, which is, again, discussing how to heal yeast infections naturally. Again, both men and women get yeast infections. In women, we know that yeast infections typically come as a vaginal discharge, and that is part of the problem. But also, women can have yeast infections that show up as under the arms, where there's maybe a red, irritated, or itchy skin under the arms. That can also be a yeast infection. Women who get toenail fungus or fingernail fungus can also be part of a yeast infection. Even things like dandruff in your scalp can be from a yeast infection inside of your body. And in men, it happens very similarly. In a man, they get jock itch. That's part of a yeast infection. And again, toenail fungus, fingernail fungus, and dandruff are also signs of a yeast infection. So what causes yeast infection? Well, yeast is a living organism. And mainly yeast lives inside of our intestinal system. And from the intestines, it can grow larger and more abundant. In other words, you can have a more rapid growth of the yeast cells in your intestines when there's a certain environment. And what is that environment? Well, when the pH of your intestinal system is out of balance, that can cause yeast to grow. What is pH imbalance? Well, pH has to do with acid and alkalinity. So in your small intestines, you have an alkaline environment. In your large intestines, you have an acid environment, normally and naturally. What happens in a yeast infection, the pH gets imbalanced. One of the major causes of this acid-alkaline balance is a lack of bile flow. And what causes a lack of, well, what is bile, first of all? Bile is a substance made in your liver. It gets put into your gallbladder. Your bile is like your detergent for your intestinal system. So if we don't have enough bile flow, then yeast will grow in your intestines. So a yeast infection is actually the result of something else going on. Just like I mentioned before, that all diseases are caused by nutrient deficiencies and toxicities. So what causes a lack of bile flow? One of the biggest causes of yeast infection, lack of bile flow, lack of green vegetables. Why? Because green vegetables have the ability to cause bile to flow better. There are certain nutrients inside of the green vegetables, like fiber and chlorophyll and magnesium, which help the bile flow. It keeps the bile thin so it flows better. Other issues, excess or lack of cholesterol. You may be thinking to yourself, how does my cholesterol in my blood have to do with a yeast infection in my body? Because cholesterol makes bile. So if you have an excess cholesterol in your blood, that means your bile is backing up, and that'll cause you to have more yeast infections. But the opposite is also true too. If you have a deficiency or lack of cholesterol in your blood, you will also have a lack of bile flow, which will cause you to have a pH imbalance, which will cause you to have more yeast infections. We know that part of the issue here is the fact that if you've ever taken an antibiotic kills bacteria, but the antibiotic also makes room, when it kills the bacteria, it makes room for yeast to grow. And antibiotics are typically very alkaline, and that causes an imbalance in the pH too. So taking antibiotics, and again, lack of bile flow, lack of green vegetables. Anemia. That's when your blood is low. When you don't have enough iron or enough hemoglobin in your blood, that causes yeast in your intestines. How does that work? Well, when you don't have enough nutrients in your blood, like iron and vitamin B12 and something called folate and B6, when those nutrients are deficient, that makes your body anemic. So that what happens in your body when it has anemia is that you get lack of oxygen flow. And oxygen also, kind of like bile, oxygen helps to keep the yeast under control. I'll say it like this. Excess oxygen actually kills yeast. So we want to have a good amount of oxygen. How do we get that? From treating the anemia. And how do we treat the anemia? By using green vegetables, because green vegetables help to build your blood, right? As well as help bile flow. Okay, other issues when it comes to why we get yeast infections, other chronic infections. Things like bacteria that are in the body, especially in the intestines, that live there for a long time, that kind of hang out. They're not, these bacteria and viruses are hanging out in your intestines most of the time, and they're just there. They're not full blown where you have like a full bacterial infection, but they're just enough to cause your immune system to get weak. So how do you know if you have chronic bacterial or viral infections? Well, you got to look at your blood test. You got to be an expert, which I am, at looking at blood tests to figure out what's happening with your white blood cells, and that tells us on your blood test if you have chronic infections, and we can treat that and get rid of the yeast by helping to regulate and help the immune system. How do we treat these chronic yeast-type infections? Well, again, we want to increase our green veggies. We want to eat fermented foods. Fermented foods are things like sauerkraut or kimchi or pickled beets or pickles, because the fermentation actually is a different type of bacteria that actually kills yeast also. There's something I didn't write here, but something called Saccharomyces boulardii. Saccharomyces boulardii, if you buy that in a capsule form, that's also very effective. It's a yeast in and of itself, but it's a good yeast that kills the bad yeast. And you can buy that in a capsule form, Saccharomyces boulardii. Another thing that's very important, I love this for helping to get rid of yeast infection. Drinking pau de arco tea. Pau de arco, P-A-U-D-A-R-C-O. Pau de arco is a Brazilian tree. It's a bark that comes from a Brazilian tree. And in Brazil, that tree grows in the rainforest, where typically there's a lot of fungus, a lot of mold around in the rainforest. But the pau de arco tree does not get fungus. So the natives found out that there's something in the tree, something in the inner bark, there's a substance in there that prevents the pau de arco tree from getting infections like mold. Mold and yeast are the same thing. So when they drink pau de arco tea, or you drink pau de arco tea, it will help to kill yeast in your body. So making pau de arco tea is a great thing to help yeast infections. Another great natural remedy for killing yeast in both men and women is golden seal root. I love golden seal root capsules. Golden seal is an herb, and it's a very powerful killer of yeast, as well as other types of bacteria. I have many women in my practice who suffer from yeast infections and have chronic urinary tract infections. Golden seal root is a godsend because it helps tremendously those situations. And last but not least is taking a good probiotic. A probiotic is something that will benefit your intestines, which will also displace the yeast. It will cause yeast to get out of your body when you take a good probiotic in a capsule form. I prefer that you take a non-dairy probiotic, not a dairy-based one. And you may maybe thinking to yourself, well, doesn't yogurt have probiotics? The answer is yes. But yogurt also has casein from the milk, which is detrimental and mucus forming, so it's not good for yeast infections. So I would always suggest taking a non-dairy probiotic as opposed to taking a yogurt. So this is how we get rid of yeast infections. You need to be on this program for at least 6 weeks, up to 6 months, depending on where the yeast is. And again, a lot of times the yeast comes out as a toenail fungus, or it comes out as dandruff, or it comes out as underarm itching. Another really important factor when it comes to if you just have yeast under your arms where it's red and irritated and itchy, it may be that you have a sensitivity or an allergy to your deodorant or antiperspirant. Another nutrition nugget is never use antiperspirants. Only use deodorants. There is a difference. Deodorants kill the odor. They deodorize you. Antiperspirants stop you from sweating. They plug up your pores. Antiperspirants are much more likely to cause irritation and yeast in your body because it doesn't allow the toxins to come out. So always choose a more natural brand of a deodorant as opposed to an antiperspirant. Okay, this is Dr. Aaron Chadwick, part of Your Nutrition Physicians. Please like this video and share it. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and also follow us on Facebook and on Instagram. And every Monday night at 7 p.m., we do a free online question and answer period from 7 p.m. Eastern Time, or at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. There's going to be a link below that gets you to that Monday night live call. It's going to be on Instagram and on Facebook Live, okay? So join us in. Again, this is Dr. Aaron Chadwick, part of Your Nutrition Physicians. God bless you guys. Stay healthy, and we'll see you next time.